I just want to say
hey,
I
what
love
you
you.
wanna do is up to you. People around me trying to be one, but this is no respect to someone. If you want to meet, come to my street where it says respect. It's not about being perfect.
Born in Wales and moved around from one part of the country to another to be sexually exploited. This is the story of one girl who was abused for 4 years from the age of 13. Her words are spoken by an actress.
I was sexually exploited for 4 years by someone who I thought of as a family member. It would often be arranged by the family member for different men who always drove flash cars to pick me up and take me to various houses where I would be given more drugs and alcohol in return for sex. Now I know it was all a setup and that I was being manipulated and tricked. I'm so angry now. I feel that they tormented and robbed 4 years of my childhood.
According to the 5 charities that make up Wales's anti-human trafficking forum, experiences like this are more commonplace than most people realise. Officially, only 34 cases were reported in Wales last year, but there is evidence to suggest that the vast majority of cases go unreported.
The factor in Wales that helps us protect children more effectively than elsewhere in the UK is that once we have an assessment completed, there is an 8-day period within which a multi-agency strategy meeting needs to be called. Within that meeting, there should be everybody around that table who is involved in that young person's life. You should have police, you should have health, you should have education, you should have social services and a specialist service, which at the moment we are the only specialist service in Wales, and also are the author of the Seraf risk assessment, the protocol and the guidance for the Welsh Government. But all of that doesn't work if we don't listen to the child, if we don't hear what they're saying, if we don't put in direct services for that young person. Multi-agency strategy meetings are only as effective as the people that are around the table, so you have to ensure that the right people are around that table that can support that child. But the whole purpose of that multi-agency meeting is to start pulling the jigsaw together, to start looking at where is that missing information, what information do the police need, what information do children's services need, education, all of those factors, health, are they accessing A&E and we don't know about it? How many times have they gone into the sexual health clinic? Are they, going in with people? There are probably professionals that know information, and when that information is all put together, you get a bigger picture of what you're dealing with. Serious case reviews that we've been involved in, both of those have said on them that the child's voice wasn't listened to. And these are 13, 14-year-old young women who have died because of being moved around for sexual exploitation. We need to do it better. We have the mechanisms here in Wales to do it better. We just need to make sure that we're being consistent in our messages, that we're working in a multi-agency way, and that we are keeping that child central to any safety plans. Too often we can look at children as having price tags on their heads of services that they may need. For me, if we can move away from that, if you want to put a business head on it, we can start looking at actually if you intervene earlier in a child's life, the end cause is likely to be that child will go on to live much more of a full life than if you leave it longer. And then the more damage is done, the more intense on services it is, whether that's mental health services, sexual health services, criminality. Some young people we know will go down the criminal justice system. So the impact on services to leave it longer is not cost effective. Barnardo started working with children involved in sexual exploitation in 1995 through its first development worker, Sarah Swan. In Wales, the issue wasn't recognised here until 2005, and that was after a scoping study that Barnardo's was asked to carry out by the All Wales Child Protection Procedures Group. From that, we really saw the tip of the iceberg of child sexual exploitation and enough evidence to say, look, this is an issue here and it's happening. Questionnaires were sent out to all of those local authorities, and from those questionnaires, 187 young people across Wales were deemed to be at risk of sexual exploitation. So from that, Barnardo's Cymru decided, well, how do we start identifying those young people. You know, we know that there's an issue, we know that there's a tip of the iceberg. You know, how do we start getting to see what's underneath? You know, in partnership with our policy and research unit, it started developing a risk assessment tool. Our risk assessment tool was used across 3 local authorities in Wales. So Children's Services and Youth Offending Services completed, in those 3 local authorities, completed risk assessments on all young people in their care. From that, we were able to put weightings on, you know, what were vulnerabilities, so what made young people vulnerable. So we're looking at some of the personal history, some of the you know, family historical stuff. So for example, as a young person has a history of physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, was their history of family mental health difficulties. You know, and some people say, well, why do you need to know those things? Well, having worked in this field for the last 15 years, early childhood experiences impact greatly on young people. You know, for example, a young person that I worked with, her mum had such serious mental health difficulties that she actually couldn't get out of bed herself and look after herself for weeks on end. So we were able to put in care for the mother as well as the child. But what it meant for that child was there was no protection. There was no protective circle around that child, because mum didn't know when she was coming in and out. You know, the child was the carer for mum. So those sort of things really impact. Drug use, family history of drug use. You know, the first young person, I won't forget her now, you know, going into a B&B because we were called in, where mum had been injecting her with heroin and sending men in and out to have sex with her, to pay off her debts. So those factors, they're important factors to know. It's not to say that parents who have drug use issues aren't good parents, but you need to start gathering that evidence and start gathering that information so you can help support that child the best that you can. And you start understanding what's normal, what a young person's normalised in their life. You know, if they've witnessed domestic abuse, those factors, it's like we know the cycle of domestic abuse is really similar to that of child sexual exploitation. So if a child's been beaten, a child's been, you know, emotionally abused, or have seen that around, when they start to have that in their own relationships, it's normalised. So that's why the risk assessment is set out looking at vulnerabilities initially, so that we can start gauging, you know, even if a young person isn't scoring high on the Seraf risk assessment, it's like there may be factors that we need to, as professionals, start supporting that child deal with, rather than letting them manifest themselves into behaviours in their teenage years or in their later, so when they're around about 10, you know, or even younger than that, we start labelling them as promiscuous, we start labelling them as challenging. You know, we need to take a step back and actually look at why. There's always reasons for behaviour. You know, the risk assessment starts looking at those vulnerabilities. For us as a service, that's where we start looking at how we pitch our therapeutic work with those young people. The risk assessment goes on to look at moderate risk indicators. These are risk-taking behaviours which may lead children down certain paths, down criminal justice path. It may lead, you know, they may be being excluded from school. So it really starts us looking at, you know, is there early intervention work that we could start doing here? You know, because the more risk-taking behaviours that there are, the more exposure there is to people that will take advantage to these risk-taking behaviours. For example, you know, being excluded from school or just absence from school. If you're meant to be in school and you're truanting, where are you? You know, are you going to be on the street corner where the EWA may come walking around, or are you going to be in some flat if somebody offers you a flat? You know, if you're not in school, you're not around those protective networks, then you're more likely to be in places where people, opportunists may be around, or people that, you know, are more sophisticated within the organised crime world. We start looking at alcohol, we start looking at drugs. It doesn't mean that you're necessarily going to be sexually exploited, but the risks start increasing. Children are given alcohol, they are given drugs, you know, simple things like cigarettes. We have young people that will exchange sex for one cigarette. We've had young people that will, be given food in exchange for sex, a place to stay, somewhere safe, in their eyes, somewhere safe. But if you've had a childhood that is full of trauma, actually somebody who is offering you somewhere that you think loves you or likes you, you're probably going to go. And it's when that grooming starts, that niceness starts, and if you've never had that, that can be really powerful. And then by the time that switches to the more negative behaviour, one, it's either too late, you're already sucked into that, or two, you're so used to it that that's normal anyway, and actually you find the positive attention more difficult to deal with than the negative attention. And then how as professionals do we intervene with that? Where we really started to see that there is an issue in Wales around child sexual exploitation. Since that time, and since my time at Seraf, the evidence is becoming more and more apparent. We have police operations going on across South Wales. We have young people being moved up and down the M4. We have young people are being moved over into England for sexual exploitation. These are young people that we've worked with, and we've been with them through giving statements, giving evidence, and still, we aren't getting the convictions that we need to get to help young people come forward to actually talk about this crime. A lot of the young people are seen as unreliable witnesses, are seen as liars, are seen as cheats. The way that they're spoken about in meetings, the way that we record about them, all of these things will go against young people when they're going to court. So the big push for us in Barnardo's is really to try and ensure that there's some consistency between the nationally adopted risk assessment that we've developed, which is linked directly into the government guidance and protocols, to get some consistency across Wales around the identification of children, and to ensure safety plans which are child-centred are put in around that child. So almost like circles of protection. It's like you have the child in the middle, and you can have protocols and procedures, but unless you have the multi-agency engagement in those and the communication, then those pieces of paper just stay pieces of paper. But where it's really working effectively in Wales is where professionals are coming together on common ground of wanting to protect children, wanting to protect young people, wanting to believe in children, and really using those processes and procedures to the best of the effectiveness that they can be. And so young people, when it works well, get services, they get their universal services, they get a chance to be listened to. Those that have been excluded from schools starting to listen. Maybe that young person has lashed out because there's other stuff going on, so we're really getting an understanding of what's going on for that child. Then if they do need those specialist service or those more therapeutic services, that there is the budget to buy those in, because without having that therapeutic input for some of these young people who have been abused from an early age and then abused right through up until we get to work with them, it's like they need that therapeutic input. They need to be able to address the damage that's happened to them. They need to be able to feel safe. They need to be able to understand that love is meant to make you happy, that you're meant to have a home that is safe. In Wales, Barnardo's rolls out training across local authorities across Wales. At the moment we're working quite a lot in North Wales. We're embedded in South Wales, and it's really about helping practitioners challenge sometimes their own perceptions of these young people, because they can be challenging, they can be, as some professionals like to call them, hard to reach. But really it's not about being hard to reach, it's about people not having the time sometimes to actually just sit down and listen and want to listen and want to care enough that actually, you know, if I listen to this child, I'm actually going to have to do something. We actually have a nationally adopted risk assessment, a protocol and a guidance, because when people aren't doing, there is processes in place that you can actually challenge them with, rather than just saying, I feel I have a gut instinct this is happening to this child. It's like, no, this is what, you know, that our identification tool says is happening. This is what your process says is happening. This is what your Welsh Government is saying that you need to do about it. So there's much more impact that you can have, and much more pressure that you can put on than other areas of the UK where risk assessments are left to professionals' judgments. Professional judgments are fantastic, but as professionals we need something to help back us up to say and push things into child protection arenas. I think we're getting a lot better at seeing girls as victims of child sexual exploitation, whereas we're still not there with boys. We still see boys as perpetrators. We still see the boys in the criminal justice system. We have case studies where boys have actually either injured the person that's abused them, or have been caught up in some criminality and they're the ones that end up in custody rather than the person that's abused them. So I think we've got a lot of learning to do around the boys, and a lot of prejudice to kind of come across, really, and challenge. The opportunity that we have is to actually start looking at some of those issues. At the moment we've developed with the Welsh Government a brochure around sexual exploitation, so we're hoping this will start to raise the public's awareness, because it's been made for parents and carers as well as young people. Young people have made it for young people. What we're hoping is that some of those messages will be taken away by parents and carers and those that maybe come into contact with children, you know. So hopefully we can start raising that awareness. I think there's still a lot to be done, to be honest. Barnardo is in the forefront of leading the arts intervention with young people, which has been massively successful so far, where we're doing poetry with young people. They're telling their stories, they're painting, all of that expression which allows them to let out the pain without having to be stuck in a room doing a one-to-one counselling session, because a lot of these young people, for them that's too much. Actually doing youth forum theatre, which has been so powerful in engaging large amounts of young people in one go. So what we hope to do is get more funding to be able to do this kind of work and roll it out, because it really draws young people in. It allows them to explore the issue of child sexual exploitation in a very safe environment. As a service, we recognise that whilst we can raise awareness with professionals, we can challenge assumptions, we can offer therapeutic interventions with young people, we still need to work in a multi-agency way and approach to ensure that children are protected in a holistic way. It's like the fact that we have a document which enforces a multi-agency response means that actually, as a multi-agency professional community, we should be challenging each other on some of those prejudices, and we should be, you know, working together. And when that happens here in Wales, it is amazing what can happen for those young people. So that's why the Seraf service came around, really, through the scoping study in 2005 and then the pilot study of the risk assessment, so that professionals had a tool that they could evidence the risk. Because professionals were saying, we know these children are being moved, we know these children are being taken places, we know that something's not right, but we can't evidence it. But what we can do is we can evidence risk, and we have to work on that basis. The risk assessment tool has been embedded, enshrined in Welsh Government guidance and protocols. So the protective circles that we can give children, if we utilise them properly, are immense, and that's why I feel so proud and so privileged to work here in Wales. You know, no, it doesn't work all the time, and yes, you know, we do fail young people, and yes, young people die, but we do have the mechanisms and we can make a difference. And the way that we can make a difference is by talking to young people, by listening to young people, by allowing them to express themselves and using the mechanisms that we have in place, stopping them being bits of paper on a shelf, and we actually use them and we use them to protect children.